Hello and welcome. Glad to be with you. I'm excited to be with you tonight. I hope what you're seeing on your end is good. If you have a comment, if it sounds good, video's good, you can leave a comment in the comment section for me. And we're just going to get started here in just a second. Got a couple things to do here in the background. Thanks for joining me tonight. I appreciate you being here. So hopefully you are receiving enough stream here as we're getting started. I am your host, Brother T. Glad to be with you. Thanks for joining me tonight. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. I just got to find my spot here. Okay. And I want to pull up for you the Course in Miracles book. Give me 1 second to get that up in our background here for us. We're going to be talking about the Black Pearl edition. And we're in chapter 3, section 5, perception versus knowledge. It's kind of where we are, where we left off. And we just had finished paragraph 34 last week. So I just want to get my screen up to that point so that we can kind of be on the same page together. And again, thank you so much for being with me. Appreciate you being here. I'm going to move this off just a little bit. And we're going to be on 34. And of course, we're going to be talking about this book right here. A Course in Miracles, if you're following along for the first time, or if it's the first time you've tuned in, wherever you might be, whenever you might be, so to speak. Yeah, I think we're pretty good. Hopefully the audio and the video is good for you where you are. I'll just check my volume a little bit. Okay. So we are glad to be back with you again. Thanks for being with me tonight. I appreciate you being here. Real excited to kind of just jump in and see where the coursework can take us tonight. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this up on behind me here for you, and I'm going to try to get down here out of the way so we can kind of read along together. Visions are the natural perception of the spiritual eye. That's paragraph 34, and that's where we left off last week. And we're going to go through 37 tonight before we get into the next section. So I'm going to go ahead and jump down to 35. 35 says, the Bible instructs you to know yourself or be certain. And quote and know yourself. The know is italicized and know yourself is in quotes. The Bible instructs you to know yourself or be certain. Certainty is always of God. When you love someone, you have perceived him as he is. And this makes it possible for you to know him. However, it is not until you recognize him that you can know him. While you ask questions about God, you are clearly implying that you do not know him. Certainty does not require action. When you say that you are acting on the basis of knowledge, you are right doing. I'll say that again. Knowledge, I jumped ahead, sorry. When you say that you are acting on the basis of knowledge, you are really confusing, perception and cognition. Knowledge brings the mental strength for creative thinking, but not for right doing. Oh, and I didn't transition for you. I apologize. I'm reading along, thinking you're reading along with me. Okay, sorry. change my view here so that I always know that, so I can always see what you're seeing, so to speak. So knowledge brings the mental strength. I'm gonna back up. When you say that you are quote unquote, not a quote unquote, acting on the basis of knowledge, you are really confusing perception and cognition. Knowledge brings the mental strength for creative thinking, but not for right doing. Knowledge brings the mental strength for creative thinking, but not for right doing. Perception, miracles are doing are closely related. Knowledge is the result of revelation and induces only thought. Perception involves the body, even in its most spiritualized form. Knowledge comes from the altar within and is timeless because it is certain. To perceive the truth is not the same as knowing. So, I want to just talk about that paragraph for a few minutes, okay? Because it's really, it's telling us a couple things here. So we're continuously looking to, let me put it this way. There's a part of us, this ego self, if I can call it that, that is continuously looking to be spiritual. It's continuously looking to figure it out, to know what certainty is, to have wisdom or knowledge, to be certain, as an example, implies safety to the ego self, right? And so here he's referring to knowledge, but he does clarify and he says, okay, that's at the center of your being, right? The whole curriculum of A Course in Miracles is about, it's literally about getting to the point where you are, you've heard me say this before, and we'll keep saying it, right? It's about getting to the point where you're joined in union, right, with, and the language in A Course in Miracles, and so we'll use it, is the Holy Spirit. It's about your mind being joined in union and relationship with the Holy Spirit. And he goes on, and we're going to talk about it, but he goes on to say that the Holy Spirit is nothing more than your right mind. Ultimately, eventually, actually, it's nothing more than your right mind. So I'm just going to refer back to this paragraph. It's not until you recognize, it's not until you recognize certainty, until you recognize him that you can know him. And he's talking about your brother there. So to know certainty is to be joined in union and relationship with your higher self. And so the ego mind, the thinking mind, quote unquote, thinking self that we value so highly, that self isn't really involved here. That self is kind of in the background. It hasn't disappeared, if you will. It's there. It's you can give it your attention, but it certainly doesn't want to be disregarded. Not at all. Doesn't want to be disregarded. But you have all power under heaven and earth is yours. You have the power to do the one thing that the ego mind cannot defend itself against. And we've talked about it, and it bears repeating again and again and again. And that is, it cannot defend itself against you ignoring it. You have the power to ignore that mind. Now, the thoughts that we're looking to join with then would not be, quote unquote, what we call our thoughts, the ego is always trying to convince us that those are our thoughts. In other words, that we are it, and it is all that we are. And of course, it's not. And so the thoughts of the Holy Spirit then could be seen literally as something outside of ourselves, but it is not. It's at the very center of our being. So therefore, it is what we are, nothing more than your right mind. There goes my book. Nothing more than your right mind. I'll be right back. So, nothing more than your right mind, right? I guess I need to push my computer back and give my book a little bit more space. Is it disrespectful to drop the Course in Miracles? Would you be judged for that? Not by Spirit. Spirit doesn't judge. We do, however. So if you're offended that I dropped my Course in Miracles book, I apologize. So, while you ask questions about God, you're clearly implying that you do not know Him. In other words, when you're joined in union and relationship with the Holy Spirit, you and God are one. And so now can you see how that's how you know God, is because you become one with that mind. And those thoughts are not your thoughts, but they really are your thoughts because you and God are one. And so here when he says, knowledge brings the mental strength for creative thinking, it means you have the mental strength to be joined in union with the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is creative thinking, providing those thoughts that you would recognize as not ego thoughts. They're profoundly different, completely different, if you will. So he's really, and we're unpacking it here, and I know we're only in chapter 3, but we're kind of unpacking this because you can see maybe how subtle this can be, because the first, I don't know, dozen times, or how many ever times I've read this course, but the first many times that I read it, certainly the first half dozen times that I read it, I couldn't see those things in here because I didn't really grasp the simplicity of what the Course in Miracles is really teaching us. The simplicity is that you and God are one. That the Holy Spirit is, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say kind of like an intermediary, but it's really holding you, your divinity, in trust while we play with the ego mind. You see. Let's take a good deep breath on that. Hold on just a minute. Take a good deep breath. When we become present and we turn within and listen, we begin to realize that we can and do connect with this inner self. And this voice within, this inner self within, begins to guide and inform and be expressed as us. And that's the miracle, a sudden shift of perception. Okay? I just wanted to clear that up a little bit, or talk about it a little bit, because it can be, that sentence, you can see how it can be confusing a little bit if we don't realize that this is two separate minds, the two separate thought systems, as he tells us again and again, because the Holy Spirit is nothing more than your right mind. It is you. It's not separate from you, but you have also the power to ignore it. And so we do, because we give our attention to this screaming, busy, thinking self, and it's all of its thoughts, all of its philosophy, all of its strategy, and really its insanity is founded in fear and, of course, guilt, right? Fear and guilt. And it's pretty insane. So while it's saying, you know, we can fix it, we can fix ourselves, we can make this work, we can figure out how to be enlightened, we can understand this or that or whatever, we can protect ourselves. I mean, it's constantly, right? Chatter all the time. You know what I'm talking about. Somebody said once, and I don't know how accurate it is, but it sounds reasonable, that there's about 10,000 thoughts a day. Most of it's repeated over and over and over. The same thoughts we keep repeating over and over and over. But we have lots of thoughts, regardless of what the count is. We can all agree, right, that we have lots and lots and lots of thoughts. The mind is thinking. And so when I tell people, course students, and sometimes when I'm on speaking engagements and I'm sharing with audiences that may not have committed like you have to understanding what Jesus is teaching us in A Course in Miracles, begin to really understand who and what we are, to understand ourselves, right? And I say something really radical like thoughts are things, and most people say, well, yeah, okay, I get that. Thoughts are creative. Yes, can be when we're connected with spirit, but what are thoughts that we're having that seem to be reflecting and that we're making the world that we're living in and experiencing? Yes, the world is reflected, but it's temporary, isn't it? You're not seeing anything in this reflective, dark, a glass darkly colored, so to speak, a reflection, mirror. It's nothing but temporary. It's all temporary. So that is not the thoughts of God, because what God thinks is eternal. What God creates, if we could say that, this creative thinking, God's thoughts are eternal. Thoughts of love are eternal. And the thinking of the ego self, the small self, the separated self, is making up a world, and we can relate to it like the dreams that we have at night. We make up a world. We make it up, right? And then we do some crazy things, and we have all these experiences of drama and trauma and exultation and joy and, just crazy stuff that happens when we're sleeping at night. And then we wake up and realize that we just made a world that was temporal experience, right? That's the thinking of the ego mind, and it's making, and the distinction is making versus creative, because the creative thinking would be to create something that's eternal, right? And that would not be ego thoughts. The ego is not capable of creating anything that's eternal, and it experiences and expresses everything in a temporal dimension as well. Okay, so yeah, we're unpacking a little bit. Perception involves the body, right? Even in its most spiritualized form, we're still, if we're thinking and perceiving through the eyes of the ego self, it is a spiritualized form would be a corrected thinking self. In other words, we're looking now and beginning to generalize the world through the perception of what we're learning through A Course in Miracles, and we can see that some of these things begin to ring true and inform our experience. Statements like, all events are neutral. What about that coronavirus, the COVID-19? I started to say coronavirus, and COVID-19, I think, is pretty much what everybody expresses now as this thing. This event, is this an event? Well, yeah, it absolutely is an event, right? It's absolutely an event. But is it neutral? Well, there was a lot of people today that talked about it, right? Do you think they were thinking it was neutral, or do you think they were thinking that it was good or bad, or giving it meaning that had all kinds of attributes? And of course, right? No question. But can we look at that event and say, all events are neutral? And that gives us a pause, and we take that good deep breath, and we turn within, and we connect with the Spirit within us, the Holy Spirit, nothing more than your right mind, and we simply commune with that Spirit in unity and relationship, and we begin the dialogue, and we say, what's the truth? What is the truth? And we let that mind, as we meld with it, inform us of the certainty of who and what we are. And we can look at everything else with little or no concern, because we're certain about who and what we are, and who and what we are is love, and what we are is eternal, and we are acting human and expressing as form, but that's not ultimately what we are in reality. And so we begin to realize who and what we are in spirit, joined in union and relationship in spirit. So does it sound like we're going around and around in circles? You betcha, right? We're going round and round in circles. Always coming back to this very simple but profound truth. You are not what you both believe and what you've been told that you are: human, vulnerable, frail, fragile, susceptible to this COVID virus or anything else for that matter, because you're not this form. You're not, this is how you're expressing, but it is not what you are in eternity, in reality, in God. Okay? We'll continue. So let's go to paragraph 36. Did we get that one done? Knowledge, well, I'll repeat the last sentence, or last couple of sentences. Knowledge comes from the altar within, and, let me get over here, back over here. 36, the last couple of paragraphs. Knowledge comes from within the altar within and is timeless because it is certain. To perceive the truth is not the same as knowing it. And that's paragraph 35. Right? Last couple of sentences. Knowledge comes from the altar within and is timeless because it is certain. To perceive the truth, to be joined in union and relationship with the higher self, is not the same as knowing it. See, to perceive it is to just recognize that it's there, but we are not fully integrated, if you will. I'm going to get myself out of the way. We're not fully integrated. Which way do I want to go? I'm going to go this way. We're not fully integrated because we're still in form. We're still expressing as form at that point. So there's still perception. There's still some separation, if that makes sense. All right. Let's go ahead. Number 36, paragraph 36 there. If you attack error in one another, you will hurt yourself. How could that be? That could be simply because you are one with all of your brothers and sisters. You've heard that expression, there's nobody out there. There's really nobody out there. It's all mind, and we're all aspects. We're all part of that one mind and joined in union and relationship. We know our individuation, but we also know our oneness, and it is indeed a knowing. So if you attack error in one another, you will hurt yourself. You cannot recognize each other when you attack. That's a form of separation. It's a form of defense, really. An attack is a defense against something that we're frightened of. Attack is always made on a stranger. You are making, make sure I'm on the right page, page 46 now, you are making him a stranger if you're reading along in the book. You're making him a stranger by misperceiving him so that you cannot know him. It's because you have made him a stranger that you are afraid of him. But this is your brother. This is your family. You are totally in connection with and a part of and joined with, ultimately, your family, are you not? So you and your brothers and sisters are joined. And no one is really a stranger. But here, it's like we fall into this darkness or fall into this absence of remembering who and what we are, and we don't remember our family members. We don't really remember our brothers and sisters, and so they appear to be strangers because our mind is split, and we're kind of starting with a blank page, so to speak, when we reincarnate or incarnate, if that's how you want to see it, into this experience. So you have made him a stranger that you are afraid of, and you're afraid of him. Perceive him correctly so that you can know him. Right perception is necessary before God can communicate directly to his own altars. See, you're an altar within God, he's saying here, right? Which he has established in his sons. Though this altar, we say, is at the very center of your being, it is one with you. And God can communicate directly to us. And we've already talked about that being the only appropriate use of the word awe, and that revelation, that direct one-way communication from God, we would obviously be in a state of awe, and in so doing, in so being, right, the ego self is out of the picture completely, but we have to prepare the mind, and it's a little bit like, and you've heard the term said many, many times before in stories, I'm sure, but weeding the garden, right? So that the garden is the mind, and the weeding, the purification. You've heard that term. It's not about penance for bad thoughts or what you might classify as bad thought. There is no judgment in spirit. It's not purification of the mind from the sense that you got to get rid of all of the insanity and the bad thinking and whatever. But that's the ego itself. That's what it does. It's always going to have and express thoughts based on that paradigm, right? But you are the Christ, and you can have a corrected perception. Not listening to the ego self, you begin to see that there's another who you are. There's another way of being. God can communicate directly to his own altars, which he has established in his children, in his sons. There he can communicate his certainty, and his knowledge will bring peace without question. It will bring peace without question. You blissed out, totally, seriously. Imagine that. Totally just blissed out, because you know with absolute certainty that you are invulnerable and that you're not this body-mind. You're not this at all. So paragraph 37, and this is the last paragraph in this section, in section 5. God is not a stranger to his sons, and his sons are not strangers to each other. Knowledge preceded both. Knowledge preceded, so in other words, you weren't born here and started here. Knowledge, before you incarnated, before you accepted to join the game of separation, before you did that, and your mind became split, that's what he's referring to. In other words, you were God's first creation. So you already know and exist as something other than what we believe we are here in this space-time continuum. God is not a stranger to his children. You know God. You know God. And his children, his sons, are not strangers to each other. And I just want to add, if you're a purist and I use the word children when I see sons, it's because I want to. And you can't offend spirit, but I can offend other people. I do regularly, evidently. It's interesting, the games we play here on planet Earth. So God was never a stranger to you, right? And we're not strangers to each other. Knowledge preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace them. In other words, you will wake up. You will return to the knowing of the who and what you are in God. And with your family, your brothers and sisters. How cool is that? I think it's very cool. Okay. This is the real meaning of the biblical description. And I love when he quotes the Bible, because he gives us such clarity, and we can really begin to see the Bible in a whole new way. So if you are Bible friendly, if you really have studied the Bible or enjoy studying the Bible, when I read the Bible, I read it, I see something that I was never taught to me before in my upbringing, which was very brief introduction to Christianity, but it was never explained in the way that I see it now. So I love it when he helps us to see it in a new way and kind of clarifies it for us. All right, so here he goes. This is the real meaning of the biblical description of God as Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I'm going to go back. You preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace them, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And I'll pause for a second and share with you, and I've shared this before, but in the Gospel of Thomas, the disciples ask him, okay, so, hey, Jesus, when, because they're all hanging out together, they're like family. Now, okay, when will we know that we're at the end? And Jesus' reply was, oh, so you're at the beginning then? In other words, going right back to the beginning when we said, oh, I'm going to go play this game of separation. And we literally jumped ship, so to speak, out of the Garden of Eden, if you want to use that metaphor, and we found ourselves in what can seem through the eyes of the ego and the way we exist together as separate selves in human form. It's really hard to see it as something other than hell. It really, for me, of course I see beauty. Of course I see beauty. Because beauty and love is what is the essence of everything that we experience. But you got to look past what we express as humans and how we treat each other, which is hellish. It's horribly. It's crazy, crazy land, man. This is crazy world. So here we go. The beginning and the end. It also explains the quotation, before Abraham was, I am. Right? Before Abraham was, I am. And what is the I am? The I am is you. You are the I am. That is, and I've shared with you before, is that moving from duality to semi-non-duality to non-duality to pure non-duality, moving up a scale, if you will, or levels of consciousness, moving up in consciousness. And so when we get to the point in the upper room, so to speak, climbing the ladder, getting to the top of the evolution of consciousness, we become in recognition of that we are the I am. I said earlier this evening, that the Holy Spirit is holding your divinity in trust while you dabble with the ego. And if I didn't say it earlier tonight, I might have said it last week. But the point is, that is who and what you are. You are that. You are the I am. Right? I love it. Perception can and must be stabilized, but knowledge is stable. Fear God and keep His commandments should read, know God and accept His certainty. There is no strangers in His creation. Now, isn't that, I know it was written originally in Aramaic, right? The Bible, it was all written in Aramaic, and it's been translated and manipulated and all the other stuff that we can, all the other attributes we want to give to it. But think about this. Perception can and must be stabilized, but knowledge is stable. Fear God and keep His commandments should read, because there is no fear in God. You shouldn't be fearing God at all. Know God and accept His certainty. Right? Accept His certainty. There are no strangers in His creation. To create as He created, you can create only what you know and accept as yours. God knows His children with perfect certainty, and you see here He is using the word certain children instead of the word sons. So you can feel safe substituting. God knows His children with perfect certainty. He created them by knowing them. We are an extension of God. He created them by knowing them. He recognized them perfectly. When they do not recognize each other, they do not recognize Him. when we don't recognize each other, what that's also another way of expressing that would be to say that we cannot, if we cannot see God in our brothers and sisters, then we cannot know our brothers and sisters, right? We are all God's children, and not one, as Jesus has said, is less than he. And he also said that even you will do more than I. Because we are the ones, dear light worker, dear old soul, we are the ones that have incarnated in this time, and wow, what a time it is, to be the light workers and to bring about the shift of consciousness that will literally manifest heaven on earth. Imagine a world without war. Imagine a world where you could be enlightened to the point that our brother Jesus was, and stay informed, that you've, for the 900-year deal, or however long you want. I mean, there's no aging, there's no sickness, there's no sin, there's really no death, right? You would just lay the body down. You can't taste death anyway. You've never known death. That's a construct that we kind of came up with, right? And yes, we did. So I'm going to come back here for just a moment, and we're going to take a good deep breath. And let's take this good deep breath for a moment of silence here before we begin this next section. So what have we learned? Our title for this section was Perception versus Knowledge. So what can we say? What could you teach me tonight about the difference between perception and knowledge? There is the all-out misperception of everything, which we could say that is the extreme ego mind. The all-out misperception of everything. And then the mind begins to, at a certain point, begins to surrender and release, because you, as the child of God, ultimately begin to remember. And we could say, when does that happen? I don't know. Seems to be happening right now, doesn't it? You're studying A Course in Miracles. I think you're well on your way. It's already begun. Because at some point, when you begin to care about somebody else, even just a little, when you begin to consider somebody else and their well-being, it's been said that that is when you really began to awaken. Up to that point, we could say, well, maybe you were just narcissistic, right? And you only thought of yourself. And we have clinical examples of that kind of insanity, right? And maybe some examples of that out here in the everyday world that we live and work in. But really, we've been on this pathway for a long time. We really have. We've been on this pathway for, let's say, if you'll allow me to say, for many, many lifetimes. But then maybe that doesn't sound realistic enough, so we could say, okay, well, maybe just, maybe just this lifetime. I'm going to adjust my little filter here, if you'll allow me to mess with my screen for a second. Apologize for my scratchiness. I guess I don't know how to do it, so can't help much. I'm trying to adjust the screen so it's not so vibrating so much. No, that's not going to do it. Oh, that's not it. Oh, I disappeared completely. There, that's a little better. So maybe that's better. Yeah, not vibrating so much there. Okay. Perception then can be from the all-out ego self, and it begins to be adjusted and corrected a little at a time, and we go through whatever we go through to get to the point where we begin to surrender our thinking mind, and we begin to say, well, maybe there's another way of seeing things, and usually about the time that happens is when we start to attract and spirit, your guides, your family, in the non-physical, if you will, if you allow yourself to consider that, they begin to marshal around you to bring things into your experience. I've shared with you before, maybe if you've gone back and listened to some of the earlier discussions, that my first experience was I bought this book, and I just wanted to know more. I wanted to really know myself and how do you win this game called life. And this book called A Rich Man's Secrets showed up in my life. Suddenly it was on my desk, and it's by Vernon Howard. And Vernon was teaching a very easy to read and didn't really point towards the origination of the principles that he was teaching, but one of the first things he taught me was about being present. And so it wasn't about making money, it was about being at peace. And I just loved it, and I just started to consume it and couldn't put it down. Next thing you know, that led me to about a 15-year journey into Buddhism, which is all integrated into this teaching as well. And then I went into, just kept saying, I want to know the truth. I really want to know the truth. And I kept hearing people talking about A Course in Miracles. And I was following some people who were, that were doing personal development work, and I was teaching a lot of personal development work, Wayne Dyer, and then Eckhart Tolle kind of showed up, and next thing you know, I started listening to Abraham Hicks, and if these are names that might be familiar to you, and I began to accept that it was possible, because before that I didn't even accept it was possible for us to be communicated with from beyond the veil. That's what I call it now, but basically from the non-physical. And I couldn't accept that as possible. I thought, that was just BS, that people were just making shit up, right? But when I started listening to Abraham Hicks, it resonated with me, and it really aligned with what I'd already learned through Buddhism and, these other personal development teachers. And the wisdom was beginning to manifest as more and more in my life to inform my thinking. And I kept hearing these people talking about A Course in Miracles, and I'm like, okay, well, I got to get this book. And once I got the book, I couldn't put it down. And it brought me full circle back around to Jesus, who I did love and respect, even though I didn't understand any of it when I was a child, 9, 10, 11, 12. And by the time I was 13, 14, I was out. I mean, I couldn't accept the construct of the Christian construct of who Jesus was in relationship to me and God, and that God would be vengeful or wrathful or any of those kinds of things. I couldn't hang with that. So that's what brought me around to where we are. This next section is called Conflict and the Ego. And so we're really going to start getting, and of course this chapter is called Retraining the Mind. And we've talked about it, right? So who wants their mind to be retrained? That even sounds scary, but it's not. Because the ego is always training your mind, right? It's always trying to convince you of illusion. So let's see, maybe see if I can get this in here. Oh, there we go. Hopefully you can see that okay. So we're continuing with paragraph 38, excuse me. The soul knows, loves, and creates. These are its unequivocal functions. Unequivocal functions. Where am I at? No, not 38. Sorry, guys. It is right. Let me go back here and fix my page. Sorry, guys. Bear with me for a second. Conflict in the ego. So we're just going to go with that and we'll read it together. But it's conflicting with my printed book a little bit. But since we're sharing the screen, we'll go with that. Conflict in the ego, section 6, paragraph 38. Oh, I see what's happened here. This is the online version, and so you see this is in parentheses up here. And they've added this since the book was printed, the edition that I have. It says the soul in parentheses. This would have been left out of other earlier versions, and so that's why we're seeing it there. The soul, and I got a little background noise, so I'm going to slip away for just 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. So that being in parentheses, it's not in this edition that I have right here, and that's why I like the online edition. So I'm glad we started doing it this way. The soul knows, loves, and creates. The soul knows, right? These are its unequivocal functions. It knows, it loves, and creates. So we could say that these are the attributes of the soul, plain and simple. These are the attributes of the soul. These are its unequivocal functions. The abilities, and now that's where my book started, the abilities man now possesses are only shadows of his real strengths. All of his functions are equivocal and open to question or doubt. This is because he is not certain how he will use them. He is therefore incapable of knowledge. We're talking about man now. Incapable of knowledge, being uncertain. And we could say the ego self, really, is incapable of knowledge, being uncertain. He is also incapable of knowledge, being he can perceive lovelessly. So we can perceive with outside of the vision of Christ. We can perceive outside of the knowing of the Holy Spirit. We can perceive something in a sense of being separated from God, from our higher self, from the Holy Spirit, from our right mind, from God, and so then that would be separated from love, because that's what love is. Love is that. If we can be so bold as to give it some attributes. He, man, cannot create surely because his perception deceives. Perception did not exist until the separation. The game that we're playing, I've added that. Until the separation had induced degrees, aspects, and intervals. The soul has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. Only the levels of the Trinity are capable of unity. The levels which man created by the separation cannot but conflict. This is because they are essentially meaningless to each other. So here he's introducing the Trinity, and I just want to speak to that for just a moment. And wow, we are getting already into the end of our into the end of our hour tonight together, which is hard to believe. Seems like it goes by so fast. So the Trinity, I just want to speak to the Trinity for a minute, and maybe we'll finish there and just begin here again next week, because we've only got a few minutes left, and let's just think about this a little bit. The Trinity obviously is a big thing that was really difficult for me to grasp when I was learning, so to speak, from a Christian filter system. Yeah, my video is buffering a little bit because I'm not getting a good enough web stream where I'm at. So I hope that it's improved as the night's gone on with us here. I'm going to try to get a hardwired connection. That's my next endeavor, is to get a better connection to the internet in the near future. So I thank you so much, Colleen, for helping me out there and sharing that. So what is the Trinity? That's always been a big question, right? So if God is wholeness, if love is all there is, we're moving from, right, duality, semi-non-duality, lines and levels, duality, semi-non-duality, non-duality, ultimately pure non-duality. If we can imagine pure non-duality, one of the best examples I can think of it is it's like a diamond, and you're a facet on the diamond, and when you're looking outward from the diamond, if you were peering out from the diamond, you would feel separated because you're segmented off, individualized from the other facets on the diamond. But if you turn 180 degrees and now you're looking back to the center of a diamond, let's just say that diamond is a round ball with millions, billions, and billions of facets on it, and we're all in, individuations, facets on the diamond, and we want to be in union or connected with another facet on the other side of the diamond, and we're peering out. It seems like that would be impossible, so we're seeing out and looking out into a separated existence. But the looking back within, turning around and looking within to the center of the diamond, that's where we would all come together. We would all merge at the center. So that's one way of seeing, or at least I'm just trying to give a visual where we can see that we could have the perception of being separated, but all the while we're actually one with all that is, right? So when we talk about the Trinity, we can see that we can possibly see a vision where if we could circumscribe God, we're just going to circumscribe God, and then we are these little circles within, like the facets on the diamond, right? That one of the facets says, oh, I'm going to separate from the whole. I'm going to move outside. And so that would be a dream. It'd be impossible for the facet to move itself outside the diamond. You can see that would be very difficult, right? That's not possible. But maybe there was a perception that that was true, and maybe just peering outside was the experience, or the having an experience of separation. In other words, we'd always been looking toward the center, but we did a 180 and we projected our vision, or we turned our vision towards the outside of the diamond. So it appears that we're separate now, and we're not seeing ourselves connected anymore to the rest of the diamond. It's the appearance, the imagination of being separate, right? I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining it, but the point is, you're still a facet on the diamond. You're just looking out instead of looking in. And the inner part of you, the inner part of the diamond, all of that is what you really are. That's the truth of who and what you are, this bigger self, the self of love, the self of certainty, the self of wholeness. And so a part of you, if you will, seems to be separated, but the bigger part of you, the true part of you, we could say that is the soul. In other words, it's not confused by the delusion that you're looking outside of the self and imagining yourself to be separate. So the soul, we could say, is the bigger part. So that's really kind of the Trinity, is God created the soul, and then the soul self is kind of peering outside of itself, and we kind of created ourselves as humans, so to speak, as a way to experience separation. What would it be like? That's the tiny mad idea, and we'll run into it again and again. But the tiny mad idea is, what would it be like to be separate from God? That was the name of the game. Would it be possible then, and I was telling you, sometimes people get upset at me earlier and when I'm talking and they're not course students, because it's difficult for them to grasp something like, okay, all events are neutral and thoughts are things. And one of the ones that's really hard for people to accept is when I say, okay, well, God didn't create you as a thinker. And you're like, oh, what? No, I'm thinking. No, I'm thinking 10,000 thoughts a day. What do you mean God didn't create me to be a thinker? You have the free will to pretend to be the thinker, but you're not the thinker. God's thoughts are what is real. And so when you're saying, Father, thy will be done, when you are joined in heart and mind and soul with God, you're literally just the listener. You are the awareness of those thoughts as the extension of God, and those thoughts, you become the channel. The thoughts are flowing through you. Your recognition of the thought is the reflection. Then you become the reflection, if you will, back to the inner self, the soul, and God, in recognition of love, because all of God's thoughts are love. So in the game of separation, we've kind of split ourselves off, and we've talked about that before. You're kind of split right down the middle. And the ego self is basically a construct of a separated mind. And so we can kind of see how we've fooled ourselves, if you will, mentally, to believing it's possible to be separated. And the only way we could do that was to get others, at least one others. In the metaphor of the Garden of Eden, it was Adam and Eve, right? So Eve couldn't experience separation, and that's what the metaphor was about, and it was absolutely a metaphor, could not experience separation until she had Adam agree, in our metaphor, because God created you in relationship, so even no one of us could ever truly experience complete separation. That's why we're all joined as brothers and sisters in relationship here in form. That's why we couldn't even continue to create in form, or to make in form more bodies, because we have to be joined in relationship. We had to have more than one, because that's the way the mind works, right? We're born in union and relationship, and so you have to forgive God, because God created you in relationship. How about that, right? Next week, we're going to be on page 46, the conflict and the ego. And yes, there's big conflict with the ego. We'll be on page 46. We're traveling through chapter 3, and we're just going to start right back where we were. The abilities man now possesses are only shadows of his real strengths. So let's join for a moment of silence. We're going to take a good deep breath, and then we're going to close with prayer. Okay, let's take a good deep breath. I will not fear to look within today. Within me is eternal innocence, because it is God's will that it be there forever and forever. It is God's will that it be there forever and forever. You are perfectly innocent. I, his child, whose will is limitless as is his, can will no change in this, can will no change in it. So if my will is as limitless as God's, it can only be as limitless as God's when I am one with God. Of my own self, I can do nothing. Not in reality, not in truth, and not in creation. For to deny my Father is to deny my Father's will, is to deny my own will, because God and God's will and my will are one in truth. To look within is only to find my will as God created it and as it is. Remember, to look within to the very center of our being, where God can reveal herself to us there, right? At the very center of our being. I fear to look within because I think I made another will which is not true and made it real. The small self. I fear to look at that self. I fear to look within because I think I made another will which is not true and made it real. And of course, that's where guilt comes in, right? Fear spawns guilt because maybe we actually did do something against God. No, we didn't. Yet, it has no effects. Dreams have no effects. Period, period, period. There's nothing you can ever do to get God to condemn you, to get Spirit to condemn you, to be outside of love, except in your own mind, in your own insanity, in your own illusion, in your own dream. And yet, it has no effects. Within me is the holiness of God. At the very center of my being, in the altar of my being, is the holiness of God. And within me is the memory of Him as well. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes now. Let's take another good deep breath as we close for this evening. The step I take today, my Father, is my sure release from idle dreams of sin. Your altar stands serene and undefiled. It is the holy altar to my true self. And there I find my true identity. And so it is. The Holy Spirit is holding your divinity and your identity, capital D, capital I, your divinity and your identity in trust while you dabble with the ego. So let's see where it all takes us until this time next week. I love you, my brothers and sisters. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out with me, and giving me a real good reason